Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at extra practice module 18, which is all about aggregate supply. And so in this one, actually, I really kind of like the multiple choice questions, unlike the last one. These really kind of get to the meat of the matter a little bit, or I guess the veggies if you're a vegetarian. So number one, check your understanding. This is very similar to the last one. Determine the effect on short run aggregate supply of each of the following. Explain whether it's a shift or a movement along, a slide along the curve, right? So number one, A says a rise in the CPI leads producers to increase output. Now, a rise in the CPI, the consumer price index, is inflation, right? There's lots of tricky ways that they're going to ask you about changing price levels. But remember, price levels don't shift the curve, right? So CPI just means that inflation changed, and this would be, no shift because of that, right? It's just a slide along the curve. Now, we need to know, is it a slide up the curve or a slide down? And so in this one, the rise in the CPI tells us that inflation's going up. And so if inflation's going up, then we'd expect there to be an increase in the quantity of short run aggregate supply. So quantity of aggregate supply goes up. B, a fall in the price of oil, so that's an input cost, leads producers to increase output. So input costs are a shifter of SRAS, right? So we can say input costs go down, therefore SRAS increases. And we know that that's a shift to the right. C says a rise in legally mandated retirement benefits paid to workers. So this is, again, an input cost because you got to pay your workers. That's an input cost. And if you got to pay them more, input costs are going up. So SRAS goes down. And in fact, it actually tells you increase output, reduce output if you weren't 100% sure. Number two says, suppose the economy is initially at potential output and the quantity of output, aggregate output supplied, increases. So we know that, you increase the amount of stuff that producers were making. What information would you need to determine whether this is a movement along the curve or a shift of the curve? Well, you need to know, this is very simple, whether it was due to, let's see if you can guess, whether it was due to a change in, right? So think about, there's a whole bunch of shifters, and there's one thing that causes a slide along the curve: price levels. So if we knew it was a price level change that caused it, then we would know it was just a slide along the curve, a movement along. If it was, therefore, no shift in SRAS, right? Because we know price levels don't shift the curve. All right, now let's take a look at these multiple choice questions that I liked a lot. So number one, they kind of wonky split it over here. Number one, which of the following will shift the SRAS curve? Okay, so this is, we're just looking for what are the shifters. And so the first one says profit per unit at any given price level. And this is basically saying if the firm is more profitable, regardless of the price level, is that going to affect how much they're willing to bring to market? And the answer is yes, it will, right? And we didn't directly talk about, that as one of the shifters, but if you flip around input costs, that's essentially the same as saying input costs are now lower, because if there's a change in profit, maybe they're higher or lower, that's changing the cost, right? If you're saying the profit per unit, well, that's influenced by the cost per unit. And so input costs being different. So A is going to be true. Let's take a look at the others. B, commodity prices, that's input costs. That's a fancy way of saying input costs. Commodities are raw materials. And again, if you're not familiar with the lingo, read the section. Read. Skim it over, right? You don't have to spend hours with it, but reading it over helps you with the vocabulary. Nominal wages, again, an input cost. Remember, wages are an input. Productivity, so that's another shifter. So that leaves us with all of the above. Number two, because changes in the price level, aggregate price level, have no effect on aggregate output in the long run. We know that, right? You've got that LRAS curve that's vertical. The LRAS curve is, I gave you the answer. That was helpful. The LRAS is vertical. 2 is A. All right. Number 3, that was terrible. The horizontal intercept of the LRAS, long run aggregate supply, is at, well, it's not at the origin, right? So let's kind of draw a little quick picture here. You've got GDPR, you've got price level, and you've got LRAS. And it's asking what's going on right there. And that, if you remember, I labeled as YF, and I said it 5 times in the notes. That's potential output, right? That's the productive capacity of the economy. That's full employment output. So let's see if that's one of these answers. At the origin. No, because this is the origin. Negative. That doesn't make any sense. Negative would be like over here. That's not right. At potential output. That's the right answer. Equal to the vertical intercept. No, because it doesn't have a vertical intercept. Always the same as the horizontal intercept of the short run aggregate supply. Well, that's not true either, because SRAS is here. And so the horizontal intercept would be like, somewhere way over here. So the correct answer is C. Did I write 2? What is that? I did. 2 is A. Losing my marbles, if I ever had them. Number 4, a decrease in which the following will cause a short run aggregate supply curve to shift to the left. So it's going to cause, something is decreasing and it's causing SRAS to decrease. So a decrease in commodity prices, that's an input cost. So if input costs go down, SRAS goes up. So that one's not the right answer. The cost of healthcare insurance premiums paid by the employers. So that's an input cost because, again, it's like the wages. And if those are going down, SRAS is going up. So that's not the right answer. Nominal wages, again, an input cost. If they're decreasing, SRAS would go up. So that's not the right answer. D is productivity. A decrease in productivity would cause SRAS to decrease because how productive you are is how much you can supply with all the materials you have. So the productivity, if that goes down, SRAS should go down. So D is the right answer. The use of cost of living allowances in labor contracts, that causes costs to be higher, right? Because if you use these cost of living things, that's going to make people's wages automatically go up. And so that's higher wages and that's reducing aggregate supply. So, so D, decrease in productivity, causes SRAS to go to the left. Number 5, that employers are reluctant to decrease nominal wages during downturns and raise nominal wages during expansions leads nominal wages to be defined as, well, it's not actually, it's partly that they're reluctant, but it's also partly because it takes people time to recognize that inflation is happening, right? But in general, we would say that wages are kind of sticky is the word we used. And so E here is the right answer. Free response number 2. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the short run aggregate supply. Oh, okay. That was pretty straightforward. Hopefully the rest of this problem is easy. GDPR, price level, upward sloping line, SRAS. Done. B, on your graph from part A, illustrate a decrease in SRAS. That's a shift to the left. SRAS 2. List 3 types of changes, including the factor that changes and the direction of the change that could lead to a decrease in aggregate supply. Okay, well, so we're talking about shifters here, right? So what would cause it to decrease? Well, I'm just going to steal ones that we've already done in this problem. Productivity goes down. That's one. That could cause that. Input costs go up. And that's like a big, broad overview one, right? So you could add another one and say wages go up, or you could say oil prices go up. I'm going to add a bunch. Inflationary expectations go up. Regulations go up. If you're getting bored, you can turn off the video now. All right. It was really good to see you. Hopefully this helped you. See you next time.